I was speaking at an event recently when a very interesting question came up about the 17th Amendment. So interesting, I thought I'd ponder it here next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study. I am glad you can join me where we read and study the Constitution and teach the rising generation to be free. As always, you can find out more at that website right there, constitutionstudy.com. That's where I've got all the information about what I'm working on, events. You can sign up for the mailing list and get a free essay on the Declaration, and to find out where I'm speaking. This is where this came from. I want to thank this group was called Young Americans for Liberty. They asked me to come in and speak to them, and we had a great time. And a very interesting question came up that I wanted to spend some time and ponder with you this afternoon. And that was the impact of the 17th Amendment. Now, unless you're a Constitution geek like me, you probably haven't heard much about the 17th Amendment. You might have heard about the 16th Amendment, where they introduced the income tax, or at least legalized the income tax. But the 17th Amendment changed how we select senators. And it's really rather important. So I want to take a minute and kind of describe what happened originally, what changed in the 17th Amendment, and why that's so important. So originally, senators were selected by the legislatures of the states they represent. Now, to understand that, you have to recognize how our Congress is set up. There are two houses called a bicameral legislature. The House of Representatives are chosen by the people, and they're there to represent the people. Then we had a Senate, which was originally chosen by the states through their legislatures, and it's there to represent the states. And it gets into a very interesting discussion about the roles of the two houses and why the Senate it's only the Senate's advice and consent that's needed for appointments and treaties. Starts to make a lot more sense when you recognize that the purpose of the Senate is to represent the interests of the states and to protect the sovereignty of the states within the federal government. And this worked for a long time. Then early in the 20th century, it got changed. And I have a whole article about it and how it got changed and all that interest. You can be more than happy to go and read it. I actually wrote an essay on how the 16th and 17th Amendment destroyed the Republic. But what changed with the 17th Amendment is the House that is supposed to represent the states was no longer chosen by the state itself, by its legislature, but by the people. Now, how does that change things? Well, in effect, what you end up with now are two houses of representatives. One apportioned by population, one equally apportioned by the states. And that is a change. See, the states no longer have a say in federal law. See, it used to be, whether it was budgets or regulations or other federal law, the people's house voted on it, and the state's house, the Senate, voted on it. And since those people were chosen by the state legislatures, they were accountable to the state legislatures. Very interesting point. Because they were appointed and not elected, they could be recalled. Meaning someone who was a senator who was on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., if they acted in a way the state legislature thought was sufficiently bad, they could simply recall them. They didn't have to wait till their term was up and elect somebody else. They could literally just recall them. So you went from having one house that was dedicated to the interests of the states, the government of the states, the state itself, to now being elected by the people. And that distinction is lost. Now, if there's a federal law proposed that would infringe on the sovereignty of the state has no say. You don't have anybody from the state government saying, hey, that's a bad idea, vote against it. They can express their opinion, but the senator is not responsible to the state. They're responsible to the people in the state. So now, rather than having to please the legislature of the state and protect the sovereignty of the state, they protect the people. At least that's what they're supposed to do. Well, why is that important? Well, we already have a house that protects the people. That's the House of Representatives. That's their job, is to protect the rights of the people of the United States. The Senate is there to protect the sovereignty of the states of the United States. And the states have lost power. And what have you noticed? After I think it was 1913 when the 17th Amendment passed, what have you noticed? The size and scope of the federal government has ballooned exponentially. Why? Because all those laws that infringe on state sovereignty that were being held up by the Senate aren't held up anymore. Now you have senators, rather than saying, look at how I protect the sovereignty of the state, simply go back to the people of their state and say, look at the goodies I bring home. And sadly, most American citizens, they pay little attention anyway. They don't pay attention to unconstitutional laws. They don't pay attention to infringements on state sovereignty. They simply look and saying, am I getting the tax cut I want? Am I getting the benefit that I want? It isolated the states. It took the state out of the power stream, out of the power structure of the federal government, and centralized more power in the federal government. Because now, if the federal government goes out of control, there's one less tool for the states to rein it back in. If the federal government wants to pass some ridiculous law, there's one less tool for the states to say, no, that infringes on our rights. That is wrong. I know the people's house are voting for it, but this is a state sovereignty issue. And in our unique structure where we have both the people giving some of their power, some of their sovereignty to the states, and the states giving some of that sovereignty to the feds, you really need both. So it is a drastic change, and it's one that isn't talked about. But if you look at the impact it's had, you look at the way Washington, D.C. has brought more and more and more power unto itself. You know, James Madison said that if the federal government got to spend money as charity, who knows? They could actually take over. They could take over education. They could take over schools. They could take over the running of churches. They could take all of these things over. Everything that the state is responsible for would suddenly become a power of Congress. Well, that's what's happened because the states aren't there to protect their sovereignty. So I want to thank the person who asked that question. It is a very good question. Yes, you know, to put it another way, he who pays the piper calls the tune. When the states stop paying for the Senate, when they stop choosing the senators, they no longer call the tune. And now, instead of having a very elegant bicameral system with two houses that have different goals and therefore are selected two different ways, we have two houses with similar goals, although different responsibilities. They have similar goals. There's nobody there to protect the sovereignty of the states anymore because the senators aren't accountable to the states anymore. So that's one reason why I'd love to see the 17th Amendment repealed. And it's one of the reasons why I think it's important that we understand the Constitution and that we look at the impact of our decisions. You know, Chesterton said, before you get rid of something, you got to tell me, you got to explain to me why it was there in the first place. And too often we've gotten rid of something because someone said it was bad and we didn't think about it. The 17th Amendment was one of those protections that have been given away. Hopefully we'll be smart enough to not give away anymore. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it made you think. That's what the purpose of these Ponder This episodes. Most of all, you know, I hope that you will take into account the long-term consequences of many of the decisions we're being asked to make in the near future. Things like government-run health care, the Electoral College, even the role of government on its face. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it made you think, and I hope to see you again the next time on the Constitution Study. Good day.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from